We're at the crossroads with MDB, ladies and gentlemen. As I told you before, we're going to explore Elvis. Yes, yes, yes. We're going to explore Elvis, the king of rock and roll, probably the most famous man who ever lived, I would imagine. Everybody is aware of him from birth, no matter what generation. He meant so much to me when I was a kid, preteen, walking down the street, Jailhouse Rock, 78 RPM, blew my mind. Then I saw him and I thought, yeah, okay, beautiful, Greek god, who is this? Jet blue black hair, inspired by Tony Curtis, so he says, so the myth goes. So many myths involving Elvis. TCB, taking care of business. You know, Elvis is one of the greatest stories ever written. It's a tragic story, it's a magic story, it's a story of sacrifice, because you sacrifice yourself when you become that famous. Where do you go? Where do you go, and how do you live your life? You become isolated, and things happen as a result of that. He went within. When you're adored like that, and you go within and you know that you're just a human being with a soul, just like everyone else, and yet you're treated like a god, how does that work? Well, in the Roman Empire, the fall of the Roman Empire, I think, was because of the emperor thinking that he was a deity and knowing and trying to reconcile that with his real life. And I think that's what happened to Elvis. But, you know, I wanted to concentrate on the positive aspects of Elvis' life in that he makes and made so many people happy. So many people dance. So many people feel good about themselves because they had something that they all loved together. And there was always a communal audience for Elvis that found themselves united by this man. I want to think about and talk about and explore with you his first album on RCA Victor. It was released in 1956, and the producers on the album are credited as Sam Phillips. Because what happened was, the Colonel, his infamous manager, sold his contract to RCA for $35,000. Now, he was on Sun Records, that the infamous and legendary Sam Phillips owned, who produced various tracks on this first album. But because it was sold to RCA with these existing tracks, RCA had Steve Scholes sort of oversee the recordings in New York and Nashville that the King did for this record. And interestingly enough, a lot of the lore and myth behind this album is that Elvis produced those tracks in New York. He knew exactly what he wanted. There's an infamous picture in black and white of the King kneeling, listening. He did many takes. He did many takes of these songs. It wasn't like it sounds so spontaneous because, hey man, you know, as I've been told many, many times, specifically by little Stephen, that it is a hard job to make something look effortless. And that's what he did. He spent an enormous amount of energy and concentration on these albums. Again, some of them recorded in Nashville and some of them when he went to New York, infamously. The incredible thing about this album is it was the first rock and roll album to reach that #1 spot on the national charts. And you know, RCA investing in this guy, who ostensibly was a country artist. They earned their first $1 million pop album with this song. Heartbreak Hotel, boom, the world exploded. It was never the same again. It was never the same again. And Steve Scholes, who's credited as being a producer on this record, actually was the boss of RCA, so he shoved his name on there, not really knowing and yet being very prescient and prophetic about how powerful this album was. I mean, these songs, man, I mean, they're insane what he had on there. Blue Suede Shoes was on there. I Got a Woman was on there. Tutti Frutti, you know, bringing Little Richard to the fore. I'm going to sit right down and cry, Money, Honey. I mean, you know, and the band. The band was Scotty Moore on guitar, Chet Atkins on acoustic guitar. Can you imagine that? He's on everything except I Got a Woman on that album. Floyd Kramer, the amazing piano player. Shorty Lang also played piano. Bill Black, his longtime bass player. DJ Fontana on drums. And backing vocals, Gordon Stoker, Ben Spear, Brock Spear. Very important to the King because he came from that gospel vibe. You know, he loved gospel, as you guys know, and he would sing to that. But so there it is. I mean, it's an amazing album. And if you can revisit it with no prejudice, and just dig it on a musical level and all of the lore and the mythology that surrounds the great Elvis Presley, if you just put that aside for 1 second and just listen, to this music which changed rock and roll music. Also, when he was on telly, man, he changed the visual notion of what rock and roll was. Film from the waist down, film from the waist down. Yeah, that's what they should have done, but they didn't. They filmed it from the waist up. The other version would be on cable. But my goodness me, what a concept. The censors were so nervous about his sexuality that they literally cut him off at the waist. What a story. Steve Allen, Ed Sullivan hated him and then put him on because he had to, because he had more people watching him than anyone else ever before. So there you have it, the sensuality, the brilliance, but most of all, the musicality of a young Elvis Presley. That's right, the first album. All you gotta do is stare at that cover while you listen to it.